Dust kicked up in thick clouds as hooves thudded against dry Kansas soil. A rough-hewn sign creaked in the wind, "Auction today." Beneath it, a crowd of ranchers, drifters, and townfolk pressed together like a pack of coyotes around something half-dead and not worth eating. The heat made tempers short and jokes cruel. At the center stood a wooden auction block, splintered and sun-bleached, the makeshift stage for something that didn't feel quite legal or moral. They shoved her forward. A girl of maybe 14, wiry as a fence rail and pale from too little sun. Her brown hair hung in damp strands. She limped, badly, favoring her right side with a halting shuffle that made her seem half-mechanical, like a clock wound wrong. Her dress, once blue, was now the color of the earth beneath her feet. Dust coated her skin like second skin. Her face was all bone and silent fury. "Next up, charity lot," the auctioneer sneered, spitting into the dirt beside the block. "A real prize filly. Limps free of charge." Laughter erupted from the crowd. A few catcalled. One man shouted, "She'll herd cattle in circles." She said nothing. Her eyes scanned the faces, not to plead, not to beg, but to memorize. Every leering smile. Every twitch of amusement. Her hands stayed clenched at her sides, one holding the thin leather strap of a torn satchel. Inside it, a silver locket. All she had left of her mother. "Startin' at $1, the auctioneer barked. "Do I hear one?" Silence stretched. Even the buzzards overhead seemed to pause. She wasn't worth the effort, not to feed, not to teach, not even to pity. Then came the sound of a boothiel dragging against gravel. Slow. Deliberate. From the back of the crowd, a man stepped forward. He was tall, shoulders wide as barn doors, with the look of someone who'd outlived more friends than enemies. His hat was low-brimmed, shadowing most of his face. Dust clung to his duster coat like it belonged there. One of his legs dragged slightly, not a limp, but a heaviness, like a burden carried too long. He reached the front and said nothing. The auctioneer blinked. "You bid in, mister?" he asked. The man pulled $2 silver from his coat and let them fall into the dust. "She'll do." That was it. No haggling. No jest. Just those words. The laughter died, replaced by a puzzled quiet. "She'll do," someone echoed with a snort. "For what? Scarin' off varmints?" But the man had already turned. He walked back the way he'd come, not waiting to see if she followed. She hesitated, heart hammering like a snare drum. Her gut twisted. Was this the part where he hit her? Sold her again? Made her work for scraps? She gritted her teeth and stepped off the block. Her foot dragged behind as she limped after him, each step a silent vow. "I don't trust you." "Not yet." He didn't speak. Didn't look back. Just led her to a weathered chestnut horse and swung up into the saddle. He motioned for her to ride behind. She froze, uncertain. He waited. "Or you can walk," he said finally, voice low and gravelly. She climbed up. The road out of town was a scorched ribbon stretching to the horizon. They rode in silence, the only sounds the creak of leather, the wind, and the occasional cough of the horse. After an hour, her legs ached from gripping the saddle. Her stomach growled. Still, she didn't ask for food. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. He didn't offer any. The sun dipped behind the hills when they finally stopped. A cluster of cottonwoods surrounded a thin stream. He dismounted, led the horse to drink, and then set to making a fire. She slid off clumsily, nearly falling when her bad leg buckled. He didn't help her up. Just kept working, silent as stone. "You got a name?" she asked, voice rough from disuse. He nodded. "Colt. That your first or last?" "Doesn't matter." She wrapped her arms around her knees. The fire cracked between them, small but warm. She watched him cook beans over the flame, every movement efficient, practiced. He handed her a tin plate without looking. "Thanks," she muttered. He didn't answer. They sat there, firelight dancing on his weather-beaten face. His eyes were sharp, but not unkind. Just distant. "Why'd you buy me?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, didn't like how they laughed. She stared at him. Not at his hands, not his face, but his leg. He noticed. "You limp too," she said. His eyes flicked to hers. "Used to." "How'd it happen?" "War." "What war?" "The kind that leaves ghosts behind." She fell quiet. In that silence, something strange and fragile passed between them. Not trust, not yet. But recognition. Like two broken mirrors reflecting the same cracked shape. They rode again the next morning. The land rolled out in wide stretches of grass and scrub, interrupted only by the occasional fence or windmill. Hours passed before Colt finally pointed to the west. "Wind call," he said. It wasn't much, just a ranch house with a wraparound porch, a weather-beaten barn, and a corral that leaned in the wind like it might collapse from memory. Chickens scratched in the dust. A mangy-looking dog barked once and then lay down again. "Welcome home." She didn't say anything. Home wasn't a word she trusted. A burly man with a stained apron stepped out of the house. "You bring in strays again, Colt?" "She'll earn her keep," Colt said, dismounting. The man grunted. "Name's Jed. I cook. You clean what I kill." She nodded. Inside the barn, he showed her a ladder leading to a loft. A pile of hay. A blanket. That was her space. Her heart sank a little more. She'd thought, maybe, there'd be a room. A bed. Colt seemed to sense it. "Prove yourself. Maybe I'll build you one." She swallowed her disappointment. "I've had worse." He handed her a pitchfork. "Chores start at dawn. You eat when work's done. You stop when I say." She nodded again. "Fair enough." That night, she lay awake in the loft, watching shadows crawl across the rafters. The barn creaked. The horses snorted softly below. Somewhere outside, coyotes yipped. She reached into her satchel and pulled out the locket. Opened it. Her mother's face smiled back, tired, gentle, fading. She whispered to the cold air, "Still here, Mama." A sound drifted up from outside. A low hum. A melody. Barely a thread of sound. Colt. Singing? It was quiet, almost unconscious, but hauntingly beautiful. She curled under the blanket, not warm, but no longer shivering. In the morning, she was up before the rooster. She limped through the dew-covered grass, pitchfork in hand, ready to fight for a place the world had already decided she didn't deserve. But something had changed. She wasn't alone anymore. And neither was he. The rooster's crow hadn't finished echoing across the plains when Willa's feet hit the barn floor. She winced as her leg stretched, the stiffness sharp as a blade up her thigh. But pain was a companion now, one that never asked questions, never gave answers. She welcomed it with a clenched jaw and a hand on the stall rail. The horses stirred as she passed. Most flinched from her, unused to her scent, but one, a gray mare with watchful eyes, snorted softly, ears flicking forward. Willa paused. "You look like you've seen your share of storms," she whispered, and the mare blinked slowly, like she understood. Outside, the air was cool with early spring. A thin mist hovered near the corral fences. Colt leaned against the porch rail, arms crossed, eyes scanning her every movement. He said nothing as she gathered feed, checked water troughs, and hauled a sack of oats near the barn. Sweat beaded on her forehead, her limp making every trip slower than the last. She could feel his gaze, measuring, never judging. She refused to look up, not until every chore was done. When she finally straightened, back aching, he tossed her a biscuit wrapped in cloth. She caught it midair. "Figured you'd earned that," he said. She nodded, biting into it without thanks, and he didn't seem to expect one. That routine became rhythm. Wake. Work. Watch. Each day she moved a little faster, leaned on the limp a little less. Her legs still burned, especially in the evenings, but the dull ache no longer made her pause. She wanted to prove herself, not just to him, but to the land, to the animals, to the wind that howled across the open plain like it owned everything. One morning, as the sun bled orange over the hills, dark clouds rolled in fast from the south. Thunder grumbled low on the horizon. The horses grew restless in their stalls. Colt stood near the gate, hat tipped low, eyeing the sky. He turned sharply. "Storm's bad. Get the animals secured. Now." The wind hit like a slap, dust swirling, branches snapping. Willa limped faster than she ever had. As she secured the chicken coop, she heard a cry, sharp, frightened, from the barn. A calf, left alone in the far stall. The door had slammed shut in the gust. She didn't think. She just moved. Inside, hay flew like knives through the air. The roof groaned under the weight of the gale. Rain hammered the tin above. The calf was trapped under a fallen beam, legs kicking wildly. Willa dropped to her knees, heart in her throat. She braced herself and pushed, using her shoulder, her hip, every ounce of weight she had. The wood shifted but didn't lift. Her leg screamed. She gritted her teeth and screamed louder. The beam rolled. The calf bolted. And then the roof gave a terrible shriek. A hand yanked her out by the collar just before a rafter crashed where she'd been. She hit the mud outside hard. Colt stood over her, soaked and furious. "What were you thinkin'?" he barked. She coughed, trying to sit. It was alive. He stared at her, rain dripping from his brim. Then he knelt and lifted her gently. "Damn fool," he muttered, but the anger had melted into something else. Respect, maybe. Worry. She wasn't sure. They sat by the fire that night, the barn smoldering behind them, saved by luck and instinct. Her leg throbbed. Colt poured hot tea into a tin cup and handed it to her. "You don't give up easy," he said. She met his eyes. "Neither do you." He gave a small grunt. "Fair." They didn't talk about the storm after that. Or the way he'd pulled her from the wreckage like someone who cared more than he wanted to admit. Days turned warm. Grass grew thick in the valley. Flowers pushed up from between fence posts. Windcall Ranch shook off the last of winter, and Willa shook off something too, timidity, perhaps. Fear. She spent more time in the corral, especially with the gray mare. The animal remained skittish, but Willa brought her apples from the kitchen and whispered to her like she might whisper to a younger self, patient, encouraging. Jed, watching from the porch, just shook his head. She's touched, he grumbled, but not unkindly. One evening, as Willa adjusted the clumsy brace on her leg, a flicker of movement caught her eye. A figure limped through the trees, tall and lean, with a crimson wound soaking his shoulder. He collapsed just outside the pasture fence. Colt was out the door before she could move. The stranger was a native man, middle-aged, his features hard but symmetrical, his long black hair matted with blood. Colt rolled him onto his back, checked for breath, then motioned for Willa to bring water. They said little as they worked. Colt bound the man's shoulder with practiced hands. The man's eyes opened once, locking onto Willa's. Not a plea, just acknowledgement. Like he was measuring her, and maybe not disappointed in what he saw. "He yours?" she asked once they had him resting in the barn. "No. But he's been through here before." "What's his name?" "Tahu. Means, one who watches." "Don't ask how I know." Willa didn't. Over the next few days, Tahu stayed in the barn loft, sleeping beside her cot. He didn't speak. He barely moved. But when Willa worked, he watched, always watching. When she struggled with the brace on her leg, he gestured once for her to sit. With surprising gentleness, he rewrapped the leather, adjusting its angle, tying it tighter. She blinked at the difference. It felt right. Secure. He gave no explanation. Just turned and returned to silence. Later, Colt said, he was a scout in the war. Didn't talk much before it either. That night, Willa dreamed of horses galloping through fire, and men with broken legs who never stopped walking. When she woke, she went straight to the gray mare. She brought a rope, apples, and nothing else. She climbed the corral fence and stood still until the mare approached. No sudden moves. No commands. Just patience. The mare sniffed her palm, nudged her hip, then let her drape the rope over her neck. She didn't ride that day. Not yet. But she led the mare around the corral, slow and steady. One step at a time. Colt watched from the fence line. His arms were folded. But his jaw was soft. "Name her yet?" he asked. Willa thought. "Ash," she said. "She looks like something that survived burning." He nodded once. "Fitting." Over supper, Colt poured her a second cup of tea. Jed raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Outside, the prairie wind carried the smell of coming rain, not a storm, just renewal. Willa stood after eating and walked from the house to the barn. No limp tonight. Or maybe just a quieter one. A whisper instead of a scream. Inside, she sat by the loft window and pulled out the locket. She opened it, stared a while, then looked out across Windcall. A place had begun to form here. Not just buildings and fences, but belonging. She felt it in her fingers, in the way the dirt clung to her boots and the horses no longer flinched at her scent. The wind stirred her hair. Somewhere, a coyote yipped once and then fell silent. She whispered into the night, "I'm not broken." Below, the gray mare stamped her foot once and then stood still. Above her, in the loft's shadow, Tahu stirred in his sleep. And far off, beyond the ridgeline, the first flicker of distant fire signaled that the quiet days were running out. The sun was sinking low, casting long red shadows across the land, when the dog started barking. Not his usual warning growl, this was sharp, guttural, unrelenting. Colt stepped onto the porch, eyes narrowing at the dust trail spiraling on the far ridge. The way it moved, deliberate, slow, purposeful, made the hair on his neck rise. Willa was at the barn, brushing Ash's mane, her leg brace off for the moment. She looked up as Colt gave a single whistle, short, clipped. A signal. She didn't ask questions. She strapped her brace back on and limped toward the ranch house. Tahu was already standing by the fence, motionless, like he'd known before anyone. He didn't speak, didn't blink. His hand rested on the hilt of a long hunting knife that hung from his belt like it belonged there more than he did. The riders came into view as the sun hit the horizon. 5 of them. Dusty, bearded, eyes hidden under wide hats. Their horses were lean and mean, covered in trail sweat and dried mud. The man at the front rode a black stallion with a broken ear and a silver spur that flashed in the light like a snake's fang. He smiled as they approached. "Evenin'," he called, voice slick as oil. "Fine little patch of earth you got here." Colt didn't return the smile. "You're trespassing, Dot." "That so?" The man swung off his horse with theatrical ease. "Didn't mean to be rude. Name's Wade Mercer. These here are my brothers. We're just looking for someone." Colt didn't move. "Ain't no one here but my crew." Wade's eyes flicked to Willa, then to Tahu. "That so? Word is a redskin passed through these parts." One of our boys got himself an arrow to the gut a few towns south. Locals say he rode north. Willa stepped forward before she could stop herself. He didn't come from south. He came from the hills. Wade turned his gaze on her like a rattler sizing up its next bite. You the girl they call $2 Willa, he said, grin widening. Heard of you. Cripple turned cowhand. That true? Colt's jaw tightened. I walk fine, Willa said flatly. With or without your permission. Wade chuckled. Sharp tongue. You keep that, girl. Makes things interesting. Then his tone dropped like a snake in tall grass. We want the Indian. Hand him over, no trouble. You don't, well, things get messy. Tahu said nothing. Just stood still, like a tree that had grown there long before men tried claiming it. Colt stepped down from the porch. You ride out now, and we forget this ever happened. Wade tilted his head. You sure about that, old man? You look like you've already lost too much. Colt raised his voice slightly, not to Wade but to Willa. Go to the barn. Now. She didn't move. I said go. Willa swallowed and turned, but every step away felt like a betrayal. Her pulse hammered. Behind her, she heard boots shifting, tension crackling in the air. That night, the sky held no stars. Colt sat at the kitchen table, lantern flickering. His rifle leaned against the wall. Tahu sat across from him, hands folded. I can run, Tahu said at last. No, Colt replied. They won't stop. You know that. Willa stood at the doorway, arms crossed. They want blood, Colt continued. Yours, mine, anyone's. We could ride, Willa said. Colt shook his head. Not fast enough. Not far enough. Jed loaded shells into a double-barrel shotgun. We stand. Willa looked at the three of them, grizzled veteran, silent scout, tired cook, and felt something coil tight in her chest. Fear. Pride. Fire. I want to help, she said. No, Colt snapped. You're a kid. I'm your hand. That made him pause. You've trained me. I know the land. I know Ash. He stared at her, then at the brace on her leg. His eyes softened, not with pity, but with calculation. He nodded once. They laid their plan out slow and quiet. Tahu would take the north ridge, moving under cover of darkness. Jed and Colt would rig the pasture fence with wire traps and oil-soaked brush. Willa would ride out before dawn with Ash, acting as bait, drawing Wade's gang toward the low gulch where the traps waited. You ride like hell, you hear me? Colt said. You don't stop. Not for anything. I won't, she said, gripping his hand. He didn't pull away. When morning broke, the valley was wrapped in mist. The air hung thick with coming violence. Willa mounted Ash in the pre-dawn dark, her hands trembling, not from fear but from the weight of trust. She rode hard, wind tearing through her braid, brace thudding against the saddle. She kicked up dust, then slowed as she approached the ridge. Wade's men were there, waiting, watching. They saw her silhouette. One pointed. They gave chase. She turned Ash sharply and bolted down the gulch path, leading them like thread through a needle. Gunshots cracked behind her, dirt exploded near her feet, but she kept riding. One hand gripped the reins, the other reached for the flare in her belt. She lit it and tossed it high. Behind her, the gulch came alive. Brush ignited, flames roaring in an instant. Traps snapped, iron jaws around hooves. Horses screamed. Wade's gang split in panic. Colt stepped from behind a rock, rifle already raised. He fired twice, 2 men fell. Jed, half hidden behind a fence post, let both barrels loose. Tahu moved like shadow, arrow after arrow piercing air with silent fury. Willa pulled Ash hard and circled back, watching the chaos from a safe rise. Her breath came fast, chest burning. Wade's stallion bucked. The outlaw leapt off and scrambled for cover. Colt advanced on foot, wounded in the shoulder but steady. Wade raised his gun. A shot rang. He staggered, blood blooming from his thigh. Willa held her smoking pistol, both hands shaking. Wade looked at her, half in shock. You little. Before he could finish, Tahu stepped from the smoke, knife in hand. It ends, he said, voice calm. Wade dropped his weapon. They left him alive. Barely. Colt tied him to his own horse and sent him limping back down the trail with a message, wind call isn't yours to take. By sundown, the fire had burned out. Ash grazed near the creek. Tahu packed his few things and slung them over his back. Willa approached him, unsure. Where will you go? She asked. He looked toward the hills. Back. Until I'm needed again. She wanted to ask him to stay. But she didn't. Instead, she reached out, awkwardly, and pressed the repaired leg brace into his hand. He didn't smile, but his eyes said enough. When he disappeared into the trees, he didn't look back. Colt stood on the porch, shoulder bandaged, arms folded. Willa climbed the steps and stood beside him. You disobeyed me, he said. She nodded. I did. You could have died. So could you. He sighed, slow and deep. You're reckless. She grinned, tired and wide. So are you. They stood in silence as night fell again, this time soft, gentle. You did good, Colt said. Thanks. He turned to go inside, but she didn't follow. She stood a moment longer, staring into the dark, thinking of flames and hoofbeats and how far she'd come, not just across the land, but through herself. Something in her had changed. And there was still one more place she needed to go. The valley had never felt quieter. After the fire, after the gunshots, after Wade Mercer's men rode off broken and limping, Wind Call Ranch stood in the hush of scorched earth and surviving breath. Smoke still curled faintly from the blackened brush near the gulch, but inside the fences, the world moved forward. The chickens pecked the ground as if war hadn't rumbled just a few yards away. The dog limped from shade to shade, nose twitching. The gray mare, Ash, grazed slowly in the field, her flanks still dusted with soot. Life, it seemed, had chosen not to stop. Willa sat on the porch rail, one boot up, the other foot resting stiff on the steps. Her brace had taken damage in the fight, twisted at the hinge and wrapped now in rough cloth. Still, it held. So did she. Colt stood beside her, arms crossed, a clean bandage tucked under the collar of his shirt. He hadn't said much since the ambush. Neither had she. The words weren't needed. It was Jed who finally broke the silence. He stepped onto the porch, holding a tin plate full of something hot and thick. He grunted and set it on the rail beside Willa. Eat, or you'll fall over next time a chicken blinks at you. Willa smiled faintly. Thanks. He waved it off like a mosquito. Don't get soft. That'd be twice the trouble. For the next few days, the ranch settled into a rhythm again. Rebuilding the fence. Repairing the barn roof. Taking stock. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered. Every loud knock at the door. Every crackle of dry brush underfoot. They reminded Willa that peace was not permanent. It was something earned again and again. On the third morning, a wagon arrived from town. 2 horses. 1 driver. And 1 man in a suit too clean for this side of Kansas. He stepped down with a salesman's gait, sharp eyes scanning the house like a prospector eyeing a gold vein. Colt came down the steps slowly. Willa followed him, instinct prickling. Morning, the stranger said, touching the brim of his hat. Name's Bernard Pike. Representing the Frontier Western Exhibition Company. You've probably heard of us. Nope, Colt said. Undeterred, Pike looked at Willa. You must be the girl, he said. $2 Willa. The cripple who rode through fire. Willa flinched, but only slightly. Colt didn't move. Pike grinned. I'm here to make you an offer. A big one. We've got showgrounds in Dodge, Abilene, even St. Louis. A girl like you, backstory, grit, heart, well, you'd sell out crowds from here to the Mississippi. I'm not for sale, she said flatly. He laughed. Nobody said anything about selling. You'd be famous. Respected. Rich. A role model. Willa didn't answer. She looked at Colt instead. Pike noticed. She works for you, I take it? I'd be happy to negotiate. $50 a week to you for her contract. Colt's jaw tightened, but he said nothing yet. Willa's throat felt like dry cotton. Her mind spun. What if this was her chance? Her name in lights. A real bed. Clean clothes. No limping around a dusty field with splinters in her hands. But when she looked back at the ranch, at the barn, the scorched ground, Ash grazing lazily in the sun, it didn't look like dirt anymore. It looked like something living. Something she'd bled for. I already belong somewhere, she said, quiet but clear. Pike blinked. You sure, girl? Think about what you're turning down. I have. Colt finally stepped forward. His voice was soft and steady. She ain't a trick pony in a painted ring, he said. She's Wind Call. Pike opened his mouth, saw something in Colt's eyes, then shut it again. He muttered something under his breath and tipped his hat. Well, should you change your mind? We won't, Willa said. The wagon rolled away, tires groaning against the path. Colt turned to her. You didn't have to say no. I didn't want to go, she replied. Not unless Ash goes too. And she hates cities. He gave a short laugh, his first in days. They spent the evening finishing a new section of fencing. Colt's left arm was slower now, stiff from the wound, so Willa tied the wire while he hammered. Jed brought out coffee near sundown and left it on a stump without speaking. As they worked, Colt motioned toward a cedar post set deep near the back edge of the property. That's the south line. Yours, if you want it. She stared at him. What do you mean? He dusted his hands off. That section of land. It's yours. Got your name on it, if you'll take it. Her breath caught. Why? You built it, he said simply. You bled for it. You stood when most wouldn't. That makes it yours. She didn't speak. Just reached down and picked up the coil of wire again. The next day, Willa saddled Ash at dawn and rode out. Not far. Just into town. The same town where she'd been sold for $2. She wore her same coat, patched and sun-faded. Her brace still dragged when she walked. Her hair was braided now, not loose and tangled. Her eyes held more weight. The townsfolk noticed her. Some whispered. Some stared. One man spit near the street and muttered, "Cripple," under his breath. She turned slowly. Faced him. "You got something to say, say it." He blinked, surprised. "Didn't think so," she said, and stepped past him. She tied Ash outside the auction yard. The old block was still there. The platform where they'd laughed. Where she'd been measured, mocked, and bought like cattle. She stepped onto it and stood tall. A few folks gathered, confused. She pulled the old auctioneer's bell and rang it once. "This," she said, her voice echoing over the street, "is where I was sold. For $2 silver. Because I limped." Someone laughed nervously. She ignored it. "But that's not the end of it. I rode through fire. I fought for land. I earned my name." She pulled the rolled deed from her satchel and lifted it in the air. "This ranch, this land, Windcall, belongs to me now." Murmurs rose. A few gasps. She climbed down, walked to Ash, and mounted in one smooth motion. A boy on the sidewalk, maybe 10 years old, wide-eyed and shoeless, called out. "Ma'am," he said, "can I be like you one day?" She looked down at him. "Only if you're ready to hurt first," she said. "But yeah, you can." Back at Windcall, Colt was waiting by the fence. "How was town?" he asked. She smiled. "Quieter than I remember." He gave her a curious look. "Didn't buy nothin'," she said. "Just made a statement." That night, they sat around the fire. The same circle where he used to hum lullabies to the dark. Now they shared stories, small ones. Jed told a tale about a chicken stealing his tobacco. Willow laughed hard enough to cry. Before they turned in, she asked, "Why'd you say that?" "Back at the auction." "She's fine with me." Colt looked into the fire, thinking. "Because you were," he said. "Even then. You just didn't know it yet." She nodded, the words falling into place like pieces of a map. As the fire died down and stars filled the sky like spilled salt, Willa lay in her cot in the barn loft, Ash below, snorting softly in her sleep. The world didn't feel smaller anymore. It felt hers.